important. All right, and with that, I am going to turn the floor over to Emily Adden, who is the leader of the city's Climate Action, Planning and Development Department. And she's going to walk us through a short presentation.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm just going to share my screen so that you can see my presentation. And I'll begin. So what I wanted to do this evening in my short presentation to you is to talk about all of the bylaw amendments and also to put this in context for you. At the last 2 years, we've seen really unprecedented crises. It's been a tough time for many community members. We had the Westminster Pier fire. Of course, we all faced the global pandemic together, but with some local effects. And there were those heat dome effects that we suffered through together as well in June. And so we were giving some thought, working with some people, with one another, with the community, with council, how could we respond to these kinds of crises? The other thing that came up for us is that funding applications for really urgent issues were not being supported. It was really difficult to succeed with those funding applications because we did not have pre-zoned land. So that was the other thing we were grappling with. So just to give you a couple of examples, for example, if we needed to situate a cooling center due to the heat wave or an air center due to the extreme wildfire smoke, in a commercial building, that would not have been permitted by our zoning bylaw. And if we'd wanted to set up rapid testing or vaccination or emergency care beds by repurposing an industrial warehouse, that would not have been possible under our zoning bylaw either. So with all of those things together, that is where this, with the broader project, the umbrella project, came about. And in this presentation, I will be working through a few things with you. We'll start a little bit more with some of the background and context. I will be speaking to you about an existing opportunity that's been in motion for a good time now. And then walking you through the new opportunity that the city has to be responsive at 68 6th Street. And then, as I was saying, the umbrella bylaws that we will also be looking at this evening is really about preparing for the future, to be responsive in the future to opportunities for support, funding, and just being able to be nimble about responding to crises in future. And then I'll be following up with process and next steps. And then, of course, you have the opportunity for Q&A for the rest of our time together. So in terms of background, as I mentioned, we've seen provincial state of emergency declarations, BC public health emergency declarations. And one of the things we're grappling with as well are a number of regional crises. That has been the state of affairs, and these events have happened more and more frequently recently. And also, as I said, we have had new funding opportunities that we haven't seen before. The federal government and the provincial government have been working to respond to the same kind of crises that we have seen. They have wanted to be responsive and stand side by side with local governments. So one example of that is the Rapid Housing Initiative. That's a federal initiative under the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. And I'll be speaking a little bit more to that later because we are seeking funding from the Rapid Housing Initiative. In terms of the 2019 to 2022 strategic plan, I just wanted to mention that among other things, one of the things that it was focused on was there was a council resolution to leverage city resources to secure non-market housing. And in terms of the regulatory context, I won't go into that in detail, but I will mention that there are a number of provincial statutory requirements that we will be following with the proposed OCP and zoning bylaw amendments. So a bit more around the small sites affordable housing program. That's the background really on it with regard to the Fenton Street project in Queensborough. So the city has a small sites affordable housing program, which is aimed at city-owned lands. And in October 2019, council supported in principle for the small sites affordable housing program projects to occur at the Fenton Street site in Queensborough and also at another site in Connaught Heights. And the Connaught Heights site was subsequently excluded in July 2021. So focusing in then on the Fenton Street properties, we have looked to create a partnership between the city and the Vancouver Native Housing Society to develop non-market Indigenous housing. This is, as I mentioned, city-owned land, and we've already actually submitted for a grant with the Rapid Housing Initiative in August of this year, and certainly looking for the support in order to pay for construction of the project. And then also looking at BC Housing to offer support in regard to operating funds for that project. A few more notes about the project. We're looking at 58 units, and Vancouver Native Housing Society is also looking for 88 beds for Indigenous peoples, for tenants, including space for women and children. And finally, I would say the rezoning as well as an OCP amendment is needed for that site, but we've also had a past consultation on this project. This is an existing opportunity, and we have had some discussion with the Residents Association, meeting with stakeholders, and putting up a project webpage last year, so or earlier this year. So moving on, I don't want to get too much into detail around issues that I think could be better covered off by the Vancouver Native Housing Society, but I will just mention a few things with regard to the proposed project. They're looking at 3 stories. They're looking at a mix of studio 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. And also I want to mention that they're working to achieve 20% fully accessible units, which is quite impressive. About the Vancouver Native Housing Society, it's been dedicated to providing affordable housing, principally for individuals of urban Indigenous descent since 2001. They're a registered charity, nonprofit society, proudly governed by all Indigenous board of directors. And they own, operate, or have in development over 1,000 units across 24 buildings in Metro Vancouver. So very experienced group. So, and next I'll speak to you about the new opportunity that's arisen for to be responsive to some of the local crises that we have seen. And that's the opportunity at 68 6th Street. Again, we're looking at a partnership, this time between the city and BC Housing. And what they're looking for on that site is supportive housing, which means that there would be on-site staff at all times. The concept for this project is a 4-story modular building, and BC Housing would be looking to repurpose from another project some of the materials, another project that didn't go ahead. So that is how the partnership can succeed in the shorter term, is by taking advantage of that opportunity. They're looking at 52 supportive housing units, which would be studios with private kitchenettes. The project includes 68 6th Street, which is owned by the province, and also 60th 6th Street. That's a tongue twister. It's a small strip of land, a very narrow strip of land owned by the City of New Westminster. As I mentioned, it's provincially owned, and that's been since May 2021. Again, the province looking to be responsive to what they see going on in the community. And we are looking as partners to submit a grant application 2021 to CMHC's third round of the Rapid Housing Initiative. So that's the opportunity that I was speaking of previously. So the project at 68 6th Street, the supportive housing, I already mentioned the 52 units of modular homes with supports. And it's important to repeat that this would be a project that's staffed 24/7 with an experienced operator that would be selected through an open request for proposals later this fall, and an estimated completion date of late 2022. In terms of what supports are typically available, I do think BC Housing is in the best situation to be able to speak to that. I will just mention a few things. I know that priority will be aimed towards residents of New Westminster and those who work in New West who are experiencing homelessness or risk of homelessness, and they would need to be over 19 years of age, and they would need to require additional support services in order to maintain housing stability. In terms of some of the support services that would be offered, they include on-site meals, connection to education and employment services, life skills training, an individualized plan for moving forward. And another thing I wanted to mention is that all residents in supportive housing pay rent and sign an agreement that addresses expectations about appropriate and respectful behavior, especially as it relates to the health and safety of themselves and others. You might be wondering how this supportive housing would be managed. So I'll mention a few more things on that. The 24/7 staffing would support residents, manage the building, be available to respond directly to concerns in a timely manner. Residents would be selected through a thoughtful and thorough assessment process. Regular cleanups of the property and immediate area would occur to ensure cleanliness. And I'll just mention a few design features that are being looked at: optimized lighting, security cameras, staffed reception, contained outdoor space for smoking. And finally, I think the Community Advisory Committee is key. They're typically created to support successful integration of the building into the neighborhood and community. A typical CAC may include representation from BC Housing, Fraser Health, the city, police department, Business Improvement Association, Chamber of Commerce, any relevant community partners such as school districts, service providers, and community members at large. For example, those who might be representing a strata corporation. So in closing, I would like to speak to the broader citywide bylaw amendments that we are looking at. This is, again, for the city to be more nimble in future in responding to an identified crisis. and not only being responsive, but actually succeeding in achieving funding to be able to respond to these crises. And so again, this would be OCP and rezoning bylaws that we are looking to that have already received first reading. And they would need to meet certain criteria. So one of the criteria is that they would need to relate to addressing an urgent crisis, either a provincial emergency declaration, a declaration around provincial health, the provincial health declaration. So examples of those are things like the pandemic, the fire, flooding that could become more frequent with climate change as well. Heat waves like we saw a few months ago, opioid overdose emergency, etc. In terms of regionally recognized crisis, we're looking particularly at extreme weather events and the homelessness crisis. There are also additional conditions and criteria. There are 3 other conditions and criteria, that being that they must be government owned or under long-term lease. They must be government agency funded. And the projects that would be eligible under this rezoning must also be operated by registered nonprofit societies or by a public agency. And I think it's important to note as well that all of these projects would still be subject to council approvals, controls, and conditions. Things would happen just in a different order in this case. But the city does retain control as a property owner or as a partner on these projects. And in terms of what would happen about other kinds of projects that lead to social benefit but do not respond to an urgent crisis, they're important. They might be time sensitive, but they don't meet those 4 conditions. The city is looking to a broad multi-year public policy engagement process, examining all land uses that generate significant public benefit. And council has already referred this to the 2022 budget review process. In terms of next steps, I'll speak to the past first. There's already been the preliminary report to council, a presentation to the Advisory Planning Commission, first readings of all of the bylaws that I've walked you through that occurred on September 27th. Agency referrals have already gone out as well, which happened at the end of last month. And we are here, we are at the public engagement events. We have 4 different engagement events that have been set up, and they're all listed for you here. We're on the first of these on October 5th. We are looking to report back to council with your feedback in November and to work towards a public hearing that's anticipated early December 2021. Oh, and that is it. So I will turn it back over to you, Jennifer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Emily, for that overview. I'm just going to bring my presentation back up and introduce our panel for our Q&A. All right, so just reminding you about how the Q&A will work. So use that look for that Q&A button in your Zoom menu. Click that and it's going to open up a separate window, and you can type your questions in there and submit those for the panel. You can also read the questions that other people are going to start submitting any moment now. And you can click the thumbs up to like questions, and that's just going to bump them up to the top of the list. And that's the order that I'll be starting to take the questions and posing those to our panel. And if you have a new question, obviously type that in too, but you can like other people's questions as well. All right, so we have quite a group here for you tonight to address your questions. So from the city team, we have Emily, who you just heard from. We also have John and Carolyn, who are both from our planning team as well. We have some folks from BC Housing who are here tonight. We have Sarah, who's in the development department there, and we have Tsitsi and Maria, who work in operations at BC Housing. We have Dave from Vancouver Native Housing Society here, who can share a little bit about what their role would be in the Fenton Street project, a proposed Fenton Street project. And we have Kayla here from Makola Housing Society as well, and they are supporting the Fenton Street project as well. So we have all of these folks here who are ready to take your questions. We had a few extra people join us during the presentation, so I just want to remind us all of our participation guidelines as we jump into kind of our more participatory portion of the session tonight. So please keep these in mind as you submit your questions for the panel. All right, I'm going to leave the names up just a little bit here so you can see who's here ready to hear from you. And so I think we've got a question coming in from Sue, and I was asking her for a little bit more information because I didn't understand the question initially, but I think she's asking us about the Fenton Street project. And she's looking for a little bit more information about some of the geological things that have come up on that site, and just maybe a bit more of the background on, you know, where we were with the original proposal and how that's changed to where we are today, and what some of the geological problems were. So thanks for that question, Sue. I think Emily potentially can start us off on this question, addressing this one.
Wrong guess, Jennifer. I'm not the technical person.
I can start that off.
Yeah, go for it, Carolyn.
Thanks, Emily and Jennifer. Yeah, so when the first time around, there was a few things that have changed on the project since the first time when we had them. One of the things that has changed is the building form. So before it was a large solid concrete base, and it had 3 stories in kind of a townhouse form. This new iteration, building on what we've learned on the geotechnical information previously, it's proposed to be in almost more 4 pods to be able to kind of distribute the development out. And we're also looking at using a different piling system and a base that would go between the piles that would go into the ground. We are in Queensborough and in the floodplain there, so the piles would help stabilize the ground. One of the other options previously that was looked at was preloading, which if you're from Queensborough, you've probably seen it quite a lot, but it takes quite a lot of time to be able to get the preloading to a level where the ground is stabilized, and with the granting timelines, that's just isn't possible. So a variety of items have kind of changed in how we've adapted from what we've learned before and adjusted the development. And we've also allocated, you know, in our budget that we are developing in Queensborough, and there are some special considerations, and so we've allocated line items for that as well.
Thanks, Carolyn. If I recall as well, there was underground parking at one point proposed, and that's no longer feasible either. Is that correct?
All above grade parking. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Sue. Feel free to let us know if you have any follow-ups in the Q&A there as well. All right, so folks who are here with us tonight, we're here to answer your questions. We're here to provide the info you're looking for. So please do send those questions in through the Q&A. That's great. I see that we've got a question coming in here from Dawn. Thank you so much for the question. So Dawn is saying, in one of the presentations or information that he read, an assumption was made that the number of homeless in New West is undercounted. On what basis is that assumption made and accepted by the city? Thanks for the question, Dawn. I'm going to ask John Stark to jump in here and help out with this one, please.
I can provide some information with regards to that question. Every 3 years, there are homeless counts. There are Metro Vancouver homeless counts, and they have volunteer enumerators that go out. Typically, there's a nighttime count and a daytime count. It is just difficult to count everyone. There are a number of people who are couch surfing or living temporarily with family and friends, people who are in forested areas, potentially living in vacant buildings and vehicles. Most of the time, those individuals are not counted. It's just really difficult given the volunteer nature of the count. So we always see these counts as a significant undercount of the true extent of homelessness. I will say in 2020, there were 41 individuals that were enumerated as unsheltered, but really that number was 52 because there was 11 people in our extreme weather response program shelter, and that shelter is only operational during extreme weather events. So if it was not an extreme weather event, those individuals would be unsheltered and counted as unsheltered homeless. Since that count in March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic has definitely increased the number of people who are homeless, not only in New Westminster, but region-wide. Some of the reasons for that is due to physical distancing requirements, shelter capacity is being reduced. So prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, there were 30 people in our Cliff Block shelter. And as a result of the pandemic and physical distancing, that number was reduced to 16. And this occurred region-wide. Another potential factor for the increase in unsheltered homelessness is the fact that family members or friends are less likely to allow someone to enter their home for fears of virus transmission. Recently, staff did reach out to service providers. That was in September, to get a better sense as to the homelessness numbers now as a result of the pandemic. And this would just be information from homeless outreach workers and service providers. And they stated that that number could be 3 to 4 times that number. So we could be in that 150 to 200, but that would include people, as stated, who are couch surfing, living temporarily, family and friends, living in vacant buildings and in vehicles. So a significant increase, like I said, not only in US, but region-wide. And it really does speak to the need for additional emergency shelter capacity and supportive housing. I'd be more than willing to provide more information if you wanted that, or to share it after this meeting.
Thanks for that, John. All right, moving to the next question from Sue. Thanks for the question, Sue. Will the 6th Street project run in conjunction with Purpose Society? And if not, how will they come together in the community? Purpose Society is a very active nonprofit in our community and located in the downtown as well. So wondering about the connections there. John, maybe you can start us off on this one, and I'm not sure if our colleagues at BC Housing might want to also jump in here.
I will say Lower Mainland Purpose Society provides a variety of programming from families with regards to licensed childcare, youth programming, including Purpose Independent School. And one of the areas where they're very active in is around harm reduction. So they are the operators of our health contact center, which includes an overdose prevention site, which offers supervised consumption and drug checks. With regards to the specific project at 6068 6th Street, there will be a request for proposals. And I think BC Housing can speak more to that request for proposals. Purpose Society is also part of the Homelessness Coalition Society and works with the other nonprofits. But I will let BC Housing talk about that request for proposal, because Purpose Society may not be the operator. They would be open to submit, but I'll turn it over to BC Housing.
Thanks, John. So the question here is wondering about how you work with nonprofits in the community, but I think also that operator selection would be good to hear about as well. So I'm thinking maybe it's Tsitsi or Maria who might want to jump in here.
Maria can speak to some of the relationships BC Housing has with our community partners, and I'll speak to the call for proposals.
Perfect, thanks. Maria.
Yes, so whomever is chosen via the call for proposal to operate the housing on 6th Street, we would engage with them very closely and work closely as a stakeholder. So they will be part of the community advisory committee for sure, and the nonprofit operator who will operate the development and the supportive housing will be working with purpose for sure, because we invite different stakeholders within the community to be part of planning, programming, getting feedback and all that, and working together with for the CAC, the Community Advisory Committee.
Great, thanks, Maria. And Tsitsi.
So regarding a call for proposals, whenever BC Housing has a new development, we like to put out an open call that is very competitive and transparent. So we call it an RFP, or request for proposals. So what we do is we put together all the information regarding that specific site. For example, with 68, we'll talk about who is going to be at the site, who the clients are going to be, some of the services that we'd like to be available for all the clients, and all our expectations of what the operator should be like and how we want them to operate and manage that particular facility or that building. So then we put out this call for proposals out on BC Bid, and any non-for-profit organization can then apply. So sometimes we get, depending really on the city or the location, we can get upwards of 6, 7, 8, sometimes even 10 applications from different not-for-profit organizations. Then we go through a very strict process of going through all their the information that they send into us. And typically we will pick a panel that is selected very specifically, and we ensure that there's no conflict of interest, because we want it to be an objective and transparent process. And then we pick the best proponent and we notify them, that they've been successful. Sometimes it's a very close competition, and there might be 2 or 3 not-for-profits that are neck and neck. In those situations, we'll actually also interview them and really delve deep into, what they have to offer and how they will support the clients within that particular building or site. What we typically like to do is to ensure that the nonprofit that we pick or that we prefer is one that's already working in the community, that understands the community, that understands some of the values of the particular location, that understands some of the safety issues, some of the development issues that are already going on within that particular community. And we also want a proponent or an operator that understands the population that they'll be serving. So all these things are very important to us as BC Housing, and that's part of what we look for. So this process is not something that we take lightly. It can take quite a few months before we're able to pick one specific proponent. On average, I'd say it can take us maybe even 3 months. And we typically like to do this towards the end of the construction or the development cycle. So when we know that we're, it's towards the end of, let's say, we think it will be done in December 2022. So around the summer, we start preparing for our RFP process, and then probably at the beginning of the fall, we'll then put it out and put very strict guidelines and deadlines that we expect our proponents to follow. So in a nutshell, that's how we select our operator. And I hope that's clear, and I'm happy to take any more questions around that.
Thanks so much for that, that answer, Tsitsi. All right, I'm not seeing any new questions coming in here, so we do still have folks who are on the session, so I think those just wanting to listen in to what other people are asking. So do feel free to chime in on the Q&A. You can also send us a question by the chat. If you'd rather send it just to the panelists and the session team, you can use the chat to do so as well, and it doesn't show to the rest of the participants. And yeah, we're interested to know your thoughts, kind of what brought you here tonight, what questions you might have. If you live in these neighborhoods, which project you're most interested in. So feel free to also send info to us in the chat if you wanted to share any of that. I have a question here from Dawn. Thanks for the question, Dawn. Is there a map of city or provincially owned properties so citizens can see what opportunities might be available to address these crisis issues? Thanks so much for this question, Dawn. I'm thinking someone from our planning team will be best to answer this. Carolyn or Emily, perhaps?
I'm not aware of a map. We could work with our provincial partners to look at that. I mean, we have separated out, looked at city lands that are specifically owned lots, and we could probably bring that information together. But there are other lands, for example, for road right-of-ways, there would be quite a lot of different kinds of city lands across the city. We could look to work with our GIS folks to create a map, and we would have to work with our provincial partners. If you look at the example though on 68 6th Street, that was not owned by the province until earlier this year. So properties do change hands in both directions. So this would be, if we could get such a map, and we will work with our GIS folks to see, it would be a snapshot of one point in time.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. I think maybe I'll add a bit of a follow-up question to that, maybe for Emily or for Carolyn. Just if you could give us a sense of, you know, my understanding is there's not much in terms of vacant land in the city at all. But, you know, maybe you could speak a little bit about just how, you know, the constraints that we have for finding sites for things like, you know, affordable housing and other such projects that might really serve a social benefit.
Well, we have very few of those sites, which I would say are sort of simple fee, simple ownership. And in fact, I think in doing our research for the Small Sites Affordable Housing Project, they were all looked at. In fact, John's team did that work of looking at the sites. They're pretty much anything that's left over at this point in time is quite highly constrained, in the same way that the Fenton Street site is. So yeah, maybe I'll just turn it to you, John, if you have anything to add. You're on mute.
When we did look at the two small sites affordable housing projects, we did an inventory of city-owned sites. I will say that affordable housing is not the only priority in the city. Parks are a consideration, infrastructure works. So it was a discussion with multiple departments to determine the best use for that land. I will say we have a limited stock of available land, and what is available in a lot of cases is smaller lots. It's irregularly shaped, and as Emily stated, there are challenges to developing the sites. I mean, some of the challenges are also new, as in where we have potentially mature vegetation is in the form of trees, which would fall under a tree protection bylaw. So there are a lot of challenges to developing the lands. Provincially, I mean, there's a lot of provincial land in the city, but it would fall under like Royal Columbian Hospital and other sites which are being used for other purposes. And there may be some redevelopment potential for affordable housing, but again, that would likely be limited. With regards to the Fenton Street properties, they did provide an opportunity because there's a number of properties that could be consolidated for a larger development. So that was one of the opportunities there. I believe we do have some information with regards to existing information, and we could look at augmenting that information, particularly with regards to city-owned parcels that are not being utilized at this time. And I'm sure we could also look at some provincially owned parcels. But as Emily stated, and I appreciate her stating that the city at times does sell land and purchase land, and the same for the province. So as Emily stated, it would be a snapshot in time and subject to change.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks for those responses, and appreciate the question, Dawn. So I think we've had some new folks join us on the session. So if you're just getting here, we're doing a Q&A. You want to look for the Q&A button in your Zoom menu, and you want to click on that, and you can type a question in for our panel here about any of the three projects that we're talking about. So crisis response rezoning and two specific proposed housing projects on 6th Street in downtown New West and on Fenton Street in Queensborough. And while we wait for some additional questions to come in, I'm going to ask a question of each of the project teams. Just having had a chance to moderate some other housing related information sessions like this, I know one of the questions people often have is who might move into these housing developments if they do go forward. So I'm hoping that you can each tell us about your tenant selection or what that would look like for these two projects. And maybe I'll start us off with the 68 6th Street project in downtown and ask BC Housing if they can share a little bit of information about who might live here and what that tenant selection process is like.
Sure, I can take that.
Awesome, thank you.
So for the site on 6th Street, we're looking for people that live primarily in New Westminster, and they actually need to meet eligibility requirements around income, homelessness, and required supports. So what we do typically is that BC Housing will assess the applicants based on their urgency of their housing needs. So the residents would be low-income individuals over the age of 19 that already live in the community. They need to have a history of homelessness or are at risk of homelessness and also need additional support services to maintain housing. And we know this is a stereotype, I know, but typically some of the people that end up in the supportive housing sites or buildings need quite a bit of supports around mental health and sometimes around substance use or sometimes around physical health. We work very closely with Fraser Health through a process that we call, it's called a VAT, but we have a very rigorous assessment process to ensure that people that go into the building actually will be a good fit. Also, the residents would be provided with support that will assist them with successful tenancy, which will also include daily meal services. As mentioned before in the short presentation, all residents would pay rent. So, and I know that I touched on who would likely be, living in these in this building, but I want to reiterate the fact that people who experience homelessness are quite varied, just like any other neighbor. They may be seniors, they may be people that live with disabilities, there may be people who have employment but no housing. And as I mentioned already, people who are working through mental health concerns and sometimes substance use challenges. And everyone that comes to live in these buildings is really making a choice towards living a healthy and stable life. And we want to partner with our different community partners to ensure that we make that accessible and possible. And so we do what's called a coordinated access approach, where we work with Fraser Health, like I said, and once we have chosen an operator, they'll be part of that, and also other available local community service providers, for example, the Purpose Society that was touched on before. So we collaborate on a thoughtful and in-depth assessment process to ensure that the housing selected will meet the specific needs of the resident. So we really try to make sure that there's a good fit. And as mentioned before, the residents sign what we call a program agreement to ensure that they are safe and that the people in the community are safe, and we hold them accountable to, the behaviors that we expect of a good neighbor. So in a nutshell, that's how we conduct our assessment process when we're thinking about who is eligible to move into a building like the one that we'll put up on 6th Street.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Tsitsi, that overview. And now I'll turn it over to the Fenton Street project team. Kayla and Dave, what does your process look like for who will live here and how will they be selected?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start it off and then hand it over to Dave to fill in any of the gaps that I might have. But this project is actually going to be funded in a very similar fashion to the 6th Street project. So there would also be support dollars coming from BC Housing. We are early stages, but my understanding is that there would be a similar coordinated access system approach to tenanting that building. There is a focus on women and children in this building, and Vancouver Native Housing Society is an Indigenous family housing provider. So there would be that lens brought into that tenant selection process as part of this particular site. Dave, I don't know if you have anything to add around Vancouver Natives' experience with that.
Well, Dave, you're on mute, sir.
Yeah.
I thought you had control of that, Jennifer.
I have a lot of control, but not on that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we are an experienced, the largest urban native housing provider basically on the mainland. And so we get a lot of calls from Indigenous folks who are looking for affordable housing. We only request that they sign up on the BC Housing list, and that gives them a number, and then we take it from there. And we look for a fit in all our buildings, so we weigh up the number of different folks with different let's say characteristics or different needs, and so we want to create that balance. So that's done through our operations team. They have a lot of experience in tenanting buildings, particularly new buildings in the last couple of years. We're just doing one this month for the city of Vancouver. It's a 68 unit project. And we did one in Richmond last year, and we have a lot coming down the pike. So we're really gearing up towards being able to do that as efficiently and effectively as possible. And we feel like we have a pretty good system here. A place like Queensborough and New West in general is a very desirable area for folks to live. And also it has one of those qualifications is that it's reasonable rents in the city of New West. And there's longstanding urban Indigenous community that has lived in New West for years. And more folks will be entering this neighborhood because, again, of the affordability and with projects like Fenton Street to provide them with suitable, adequate, and good quality housing. So.
Thank you. So while I have you, Dave, I'm going to go on to Diana's question here and ask you to weigh in first here. Will residents of the Fenton Street project be required to be employed at any level? Do they have to have employment?
No, they don't.
Okay, thank you. And Tsitsi, same question to you for the 6th Street project.
No, employment is not a requirement.
Okay,
can I add to my answer?
Absolutely. Please go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so when I say it's not a requirement, it does not mean that all tenants will not be employed. It's just that we look at a balance in a community. So for example, we probably wouldn't strive to have the entire population unemployed, or the converse of that, fully employed. So we try to achieve balanced communities.
Great.
If I may,
go for it, Kayla.
Sorry, I was just going to say, if I may also add that the part of the funding for these projects that is being sourced is the support dollars, which that includes tenant support workers and other staff that are there to support tenants to potentially gain job skills, do training, and potentially even go forth and get a job. So I think there's maybe a little bit more to that story as well, which is perhaps someone enters in unemployed, housing will stabilize, you know, and allow then that skill set to be increased and moving into employment potentially.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind adding something too, Jennifer, just because I have such a recent experience that I wanted to share. It was literally a few hours ago. I needed to drop something off to someone who works at Maria Curie Cottage, which I hadn't even realized is there. It's just down on Carnarvon, and it's a 35-bed facility where 15 of the beds are for a halfway house for people who are on conditional bail, conditional release, and 20 of the beds are for people who are were homeless or at risk of homelessness. And I found myself, as I walked there, because I needed to drop things off, I found myself walking with some people who were returning from a hard day's work. They looked like they were construction workers. And it turned out we were going to the same place. So we all kind of went in together. So you know, it was interesting because it was very, very well coordinated process. There was a front desk and a staffed entry area, and it seemed to be very well established in the neighborhood. Yeah, it was an interesting experience I just happened to have had today.
Thanks for sharing that, Emily.
Jennifer,
yeah,
I was going to add that safe, secure, affordable housing is really a key determinant of a healthy life and a place to start from. So oftentimes folks will come in unemployed. They might, so they stabilize in affordable housing. They might go on to school, you know, either finish their high school or do some post-secondary stuff, and ultimately become employed and, you know, get into the workforce and thrive there. So these things really are aided. People's lives are aided by first having that safe, secure, affordable housing.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Dave, and Tsitsi and Emily. And And Kayla as well. Thank you. And thank you, Diana, for the question. And thanks for being here, Diana. We appreciate you being here and participating. All right, so our question queue is empty once again. So I'll prompt everyone who's with us on the session to think about what questions you might have, and make sure you share those with us either in the Q&A box or through the chat. That's an option for you as well. And yeah, let's think about what else we can share with folks. You know, we didn't give BC Housing or Vancouver Native Housing Society a chance to give their own presentations. So maybe I'll ask if there's any kind of details about the proposed projects that you might like to share with the folks who are on the session, maybe that weren't covered in the presentation or that you would like to repeat. Anybody want to kind of jump in and tell us a little bit about your project? Carolyn's got her hand up. Carolyn.
I just have a question because I know even some of my own colleagues have asked previously for BC Housing, and maybe a little bit of information on what exactly is modular housing. Like, it's kind of a new term, maybe just a little modular housing 101 and how it's different from kind of your typical construction.
I can take this, Jennifer.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yes, thanks, Carolyn. So the modular housing is pretty interesting, and it's only a couple of years ago that I first visited my first modular housing factory, which is exciting to see the way that they're constructed. The actual materials that go into building a modular are the same as materials that go into building on site. It's the way that it's constructed that is different. And so just as there can be wood frame buildings on site and there can be steel frame buildings on site, there can be wood frame and steel frame modular building. The modular companies that exist in Canada and in the US, many of them started off building projects in, say, work camps or for more temporary uses. And as the construction industry grows and develops, these have become higher quality and have become able to be used in permanent forms of construction. And there are advantages to building in this very controlled factory environment because it allows you to be more precise. It allows you to avoid issues which you might have with weather that you might encounter on site. When you're constructing things outside, then you don't have as controlled of an environment. You can do things more quickly and efficiently because people can focus as in other industrial assembly lines that you can imagine with cars or other products that people can focus on one task. It's specialization, and literally, and I shared this with council last week, literally when I was in that factory, I could see the modules lined up. And the first module, they're putting in, the workers on that module are putting in earlier stages of the construction, and then the module next to it, they're doing the next stage of construction simultaneously. So and then the modules get finished like one at a time. So the one that's at the end of the lineup, just having its drywall put on, and having the countertops put on, and the one at the beginning is just getting some insulation put in. So that's the way that modular construction works, and it's pretty neat, and it's exciting to see the construction industry in North America growing and learning and developing, because we have had a lot of the same construction methodologies for hundreds of years now. So it's interesting to learn about these.
Thanks for sharing that, Sarah. Where was the factory that you got to visit?
It was in Agassiz. There are there are a few different modular companies around in North America, and the benefit of this is that these companies are starting to see more investment in social housing, and that social housing is embracing this as an opportunity because of it can deliver things more quickly for our housing crises, and so the industry is able to respond to that, and it's really great to see these companies developing.
Great. Thanks for that. Thanks for the question, Carolyn. That's a good one. Dave's got his hand up. Please jump in.
Just curious. In the beginning of the modular age, if we can call it that, in BC in particular, they had what they referred to as temporary modular, and then I believe more permanent modular. The 6th Street project, which category does that fit into?
We really are seeing all of the modular being more permanent now. As the technology improves, and it's also partly about what kind of foundation you select. So if you select you can have just point square foundations that you sit on, and they're movable. There are, like with the geological discussion we were just having, there are different kinds of foundations that can respond to unusual geological conditions that could use piling or metal of some kind. But if you use a typical poured foundation like you would use with a site-built building, then it's pretty much the same as a typical site-built building, and the lifespan reflects that as well.
Great. Awesome. Thanks for that. I think we've had someone new join the session, so welcome. Thanks for coming and being here with us. We are having a question and answer time, so if you have questions for the panel that's here this evening, please go ahead and pop those into the Q&A box. You're also welcome to use the chat if that's something you're more familiar with, but just click into one of those boxes in your Zoom menu and feel free to ask a question. We're here until 8:30, so we've got about 20 minutes left in our session. And while we're waiting for some more questions to come in from participants, I'm just going to ask another question here that's kind of come up from the team. You know, you've talked a little bit about, we talked about tenant selection and about, you know, being intentional about, you know, a mix of people in the building. And we've talked a little bit about, you know, the agreements that people sign to move in, that, you know, they're committing to kind of respectful behavior and things like that. What happens if it doesn't work out? So, you know, if there are any challenges with a particular tenant or things are not working, is there an opportunity or a process where a tenant might face eviction or be asked to move on? And maybe, you know, specific to, you know, any issues with a tenant, how those might be addressed. But maybe I'll also add to that, you know, if there are challenges in the neighborhood, like if people are seeing, I don't know, maybe increased garbage, or there's other things that the community is concerned about, how would those things be addressed? So how would a challenge with an individual tenant be handled? And then also any concerns that come up from neighbors or the community. I can start us off with potentially BC Housing. Is that you, Tsitsi?
Yeah, but I think I'll share my airspace with Maria.
Okay.
Maria, do you want to take this one on first?
So yes, there are actually cases where tenants may be asked, may be evicted or asked to move to a different type of housing. We do, if it's a tenancy agreement that they enter into or a program agreement, there are certain restrictions, or there are certain aspects of the tenancy that would be required of the tenant to comply with. So with a regular tenancy agreement, of course, it's the usual, it will follow the RTA, the Residential Tenancy Act eviction policy. And also for program agreements, it would depend on what is on the program, but normally it would be severe contraventions of the policies, right? Like violence would be one of them, but definitely no one is evicted for non-payment of rent. And as supportive housing, the operator would have the tenant support workers work as much as possible with the tenant, whether that's to find a different housing site that would be a better fit for them, or actually provide more supports to help whatever the issue is. If it's hoarding or anything like that, it would be to provide more supports and find solutions rather than just straight out evict them right away. So it's really, that's why it's supportive housing. We try not to just evict the tenants right away, but there are instances that eviction would happen.
Thanks for that, Maria. I'll turn it over to the Fenton Street team.
Yeah, so typically I think what's going on 6th Street is probably a program agreement. Oftentimes with modular housing, there's a program agreement. Fenton Street would be a tenancy agreement, and it would fall under the Residential Tenancy Branch or the Residential Tenancy Act. So if you had behavioral issues with the tenant or a non-payment of rent with the tenancy agreement, you would seek to resolve those issues at the Residential Tenancy Branch. Maria referred to in the other situation and in the modular situation of moving tenants to a more suitable housing. So in the sense with a program agreement, you as the operator have more control over that process. The Residential Tenancy Branch, I kind of call it a crapshoot. So it depends on, you know, it's like going to court for anything. You can never predict what's going to happen. So there's more certainty, I guess, with a program agreement, but it's because you're dealing with different clientele as well.
Thanks for clarifying those differences, Dave. John, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because you did talk about what happens or if there are concerns in the neighborhood. We talked previously about a community advisory committee. And I will say with regards to Mazarine Lodge, which is the supportive housing building in Queensborough, which is operated by the Elizabeth Fry Society, there is a community advisory committee. And on that committee, you have representatives from BC Housing, the city, and from the city, it's planning and police. Also Fraser Health, we have the nonprofit operator, we have members from the parent advisory committees from both the elementary and from the middle school. We have community residents. It is a really diverse group of people. And the purpose of that is if issues are apparent in the neighborhood, they're brought to the attention of the community advisory committee and also to the nonprofit operator, and all attempts are made to address that issue in a proactive manner. If it's something that's immediate, then it is brought directly to the attention of the nonprofit operator, and they can deal with that. And we've had great success. There hasn't been a lot of issues, but issues that have arisen have been either dealt with through the community advisory committee or by the nonprofit operator through either a city person or a community member directly contacting that nonprofit operator. And typically the nonprofit operator will be involved in the community. They'll reach out, they'll get involved in the community, they'll get their contact information out. And in that way, people feel that, you know, there is a direct line of communication. And I think it's a lot about community relations, and that's really important. I just also want to say with Mazarine Lodge, there's been efforts around a community garden where the 44 women who reside at Mazarine Lodge are part of that community garden, including residents of the larger community. And the women from Mazarine Lodge are involved in programming at the Queensborough Community Centre. So I think a big part of this, and I know it's been hinted at, but a big part of this is that these individuals do better when they're part of a community, part of a neighborhood, involved in the community. And as we see from Mazarine Lodge, with the women there, but I'm sure with all residents, they want to make a contribution too. And I just should say, just to build on what Emily stated earlier, we have a lot of supportive housing in New Westminster, specifically designed for people that are homeless. And a lot of people in our community don't know they exist. And we always say that's a successful housing project when people live there, it's part of the community, but in some ways it's invisible. And Emily talked about the Maria Carey Cottage, but there's also the Rhoda Kayla Residence, the Cliff Block. There's many other Fraser Heights. So there's many other projects that seamlessly fit in the neighborhood. And I just wanted to say that's really important, that they're part of the neighborhood, but also hopefully it isn't a distraction from the neighborhood. It goes about, provides housing, and it's seen as a significant contribution.
Thanks for those comments, John. I think I appreciate you raising Mazarine Lodge as well, because that is, a recent project that I think a lot of folks in the community remember. And there were concerns from the community about that, and it sounds like it is very successful so far. So that's great to hear. All right. If you have questions, get them in. We have a few minutes left together, and we're here to answer your questions. And so please do go ahead and submit those. Feel free to use the chat if you'd rather submit a question anonymously just to the panel instead of asking in front of other participants. Anyone else on the panel have some questions for each other?
I didn't have a question, but you did ask about a little bit more about this project specifics. So we did talk a little bit about Fenton Street in terms of there's a modular component, some of the geotechnical pieces, that there is the total unit count, but I thought maybe I could quickly talk about the breakdown. So right now we're targeting 12 studios, 16 one-beds and 30 two-beds. So that puts us into the 50% category for that two-bedroom range. So making sure that there's a target on some of those larger sized units in that development.
Thanks for sharing that, Kayla. And I think we shared earlier as well that the focus will be on women and children primarily in this proposed building. That's right. Is that correct?
There's a target of at least 50% of the units towards that women and children. Yes.
Great. Thank you. All right. Other questions? Anything else that the panelists might want to jump in and share with us that hasn't been covered already?
So Jennifer, I think we want to share about the 6th Street development, the difference between a shelter and supportive housing, just so the community is clear. The project at 6th Street will not be a shelter. The difference being a shelter is a temporary space, usually a bed or a mat. It's not really something someone can call their home. Someone who stays at the shelter does not pay rent, and they're usually there for a limited time. So for supportive housing, which is what we're going to put up at 6th Street, that would be something like a regular rental building. It will be someone's home. They will be paying rent. And it's just, there's an added layer of supports to help them maintain a successful tenancy. It will be a self-contained unit, so definitely very different from a temporary shelter. So just so the community is clear, it is not a shelter, it is supportive housing, a rental unit that the individuals can call their home.
Thank you so much for that, Maria. And maybe you could just add a couple more details for us. So we're looking at single adults in the units. What about if there's a couple? Do they have an opportunity to live in this proposed building?
That's a very good question. So right now the units planned for this supportive housing is individual units. There will be studio type units. So normally in other supportive housing developments where it's studio type units, if there's a couple, they would be in different units. I defer to Tsitsi if there are any plans of modifications in this project.
Right, for this project, I don't think we have modifications, so it will be single units. And we have been asked in different communities to start producing more family type units, and we are listening to that. But unfortunately for this particular project, it's going to be single units.
Thank you for that. We have a question here from Susan asking, what is the approximate size per unit? Do you have that, like a square footage?
Approximately 350.
350 square feet. Okay, thank you. And I think from what I know from other projects, they would have a kitchenette inside. Is that right? Yeah, I've seen nodding
That's
head.
correct, a kitchenette, yes.
Perfect. John, I see your hand.
I just wanted to raise this because I know we didn't have someone raise it from the public today, but I know it will be raised. Our seniors population, our homeless population is also aging, and people that are homeless tend to age at a quicker rate than the general population. And I know as part of our COVID-19 at-risk and vulnerable populations task force, we have a member who will raise the question as to how many of the units are accessible.
BC Housing's design guidelines, which we have, require that 5% of units of our buildings are accessible. So 5% of 52.
Great. Thanks for that. All right, I am going to just share a little bit of information about next steps as we get close to the end of our session here together, just to remind everyone about the additional information sessions that we do have coming up, and then ways that you can provide your feedback to the city on these three proposed projects. So we do have additional information sessions coming up later in October. So on October 19th, our focus will be on the 6th Street project in that session. And the next night on October 20th, the focus will be on the Fenton Street project. And then October 21st, it will be the same format as this evening. So a focus on all three of the projects, and you'll likely see, if you happen to join that session as well, you'll likely see many of the same panelists on the session to address questions. We invite you to check out our Be Heard New West project page. It is called Crisis Response Zoning and Housing Projects. And that's where you can find information on all three of the proposed projects, and also you can share your feedback there. So we do have an online comment form. You also can send a direct email, and there's some more information on the Be Heard page about other ways that you can connect with us. You can request a phone call with staff, you can mail a letter. And as Emily shared, we're looking to report to council on what we've heard from the community in November, and we're anticipating a public hearing potentially in December 2021. All right, so Zaria has gone ahead and put in the project page link in the chat there. And thank you for the note, Susan. We'll look forward to seeing you on the 19th as well. Thanks everyone for being here with us tonight. I'm not seeing any additional questions coming in, so we might just say a big thank you to all of you for being here and for listening in, for sending your questions in, and for being interested in these projects. We really appreciate it. We ask that you share the message, share the information with some of your neighbors. Let others know about the sessions that are coming up. And we want to make sure that folks have the information that they're looking for and that they're able to share their feedback with us as well. So we appreciate you helping spread the word. Thank you again for your time. Have a good rest of your evening. And we'll see you again on another session soon. Thanks everyone from the panel as well for being here and for participating and helping to share some great information. We appreciate it. And we will call it there. Have a great night, everyone. Bye.